Thanks. So just to be clear, I'm not that guy at all. I'm the actual polar opposite. I'm sorry if I'm not inspirational and I feel like a cloud above you. But let's start. First, fuck-ups, which I think people don't think enough about. Silicon Valley is a place that likes to endlessly pet itself and consider itself fantastic. I do not think that. I think there's a lot of fantastic things, but it gets a little wearying, all this self-congratulation, the self-regard, and the self-ishness. So I always say intelligence has its limitations, but stupidity is infinite. All right, we're going to go to the first slide, and then I'm going to talk mostly with Alistair, who's going to ask me some questions. Oops, how do I go back? Back. Can you go back, you guys? Okay, this is one of my favorite slides, keep calm and shut the fuck up. I think you should ignore half of this as an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I started ReCode, which is a content company that we recently sold to Vox Media. I left the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago because they were so endlessly non-entrepreneurial and didn't want to see what was coming down the pike in terms of the end of media content. And so we went off and did our own thing and then actually quickly sold because it's really, there were a lot of people getting funded and we felt Vox Media was a really fantastic institution. And there's a couple things I learned along the way as I was being an entrepreneur and also covering entrepreneurs. The first part is really important. You have to keep calm. There's a lot of poodle-like nervousness in Silicon Valley and manicness that everybody, entrepreneurs, feel all the time. There's very few calm entrepreneurs. I think it's a really great quality. Someone who I really admire, Stuart Butterfield, is really calm. I would say Mark Zuckerberg is actually really calm. It's a really great quality as an entrepreneur not to freak out and be on the constant edge of something, even though many people push that idea in Silicon Valley. The second part, shut the fuck up, you cannot do as an entrepreneur. One of the things that's really important in the entrepreneurial space is to be very clear about what you want, say it clearly, and not hold back. I'm not someone who is known as holding back, and I think it's done me really well. Obnoxiousness has been a really good career choice for me. And so I think it's really important, especially women, not to step back and not to avoid being aggressive, avoid being clear, avoid being difficult at times. For the women in the audience, I think you really do understand this, how hard it is and how much you pay for being that way. And you should not care about that, because I think one of the reasons I've succeeded is because I don't hold back. This is a famous quote they like to push about in Silicon Valley. It says, "I haven't failed, I've found 10,000 ways that it won't work." It's a really famous quote by Thomas Edison, and it's actually a really good one that you should keep going. If you're Thomas Edison, you can say this. Not all of us are Thomas Edison, though. One of the things in Silicon Valley that they talk about a lot is that failure is a good thing. Failure is not a good thing. It's not a great thing. And they use terms like pivot. They use all kinds of euphemisms for fucking up. It's all right to say you fail. It's just fine. Everybody fails all day long. Stuart, for example, failed with his first company, Glitch, that later became Slack. Slack was a side project. Jack Dorsey failed with Odeo, which later became Twitter. And now Twitter is failing, but that's another issue. But it's doing it beautifully. It really is. It's quite something to watch. But I still love Twitter. Lots and lots of people in Silicon Valley have had failures. Most of the really good ones admit that that's precisely what it was. And they try to learn from it. They try to get something out of it, but they don't celebrate it. The only good thing about celebrating failure is it's okay to fail, and it absolutely is. In Silicon Valley, you can fail 99 times and they'd still shove money in your hands, these horrible VCs, if they thought they could make a dime off of you. So that's okay. It's all right to do it, but you actually cannot act like it's the greatest thing in the world. It's not a really, I don't think it's a very good trait. Next one. It's not a meritocracy. It's not a meritocracy. It's a meritocracy. I'm speaking to the white guys in the room. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have advantages other people don't have. I know that's hard. I have 2 white sons myself, and they are very fantastic kids. They're fantastic men, and they're growing into fantastic men, but their sense of privilege is so high and they don't realize it. And so one of the things that happens in Silicon Valley is a lot of people there feel as if they got where they got purely based on talent. This is not so. Some of them are really talented, some of them are not, but it is not the case. It's one thing that's really important for everyone to understand. That's the reason why Google, Facebook, everybody else has 70% white male leadership, or 90% white male leadership, 70% in the company. This doesn't happen by accident. This doesn't happen because white people are more talented than everybody else, especially white men. It just isn't true. I was talking to the CEO of Twitter, the previous CEO of Twitter, Dick Costolo, who's a wonderful guy, and I like him a lot. And I was writing a story about the fact that there were 10 white men on the board of Twitter. 3 of them were named Peter, and 1 of them was named Dick, which was fascinating to me on some level. I wrote this in a piece, and everyone was horrified that I said that, but it was actually factually correct. I said, this cannot be true. You cannot have 10 white men and it be an accident. It just happened that way. And he said, well, it just did. I said, it's mathematically impossible. You tried to do this, like you did it. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. It went back and forth. I don't care. He was wrong. But one of the things that he said, and he's again, I cannot underscore what a terrific guy he is. He literally said to me, well, we have standards. The word standard is only applied to people of color and women. It is never applied to the men on the board. We never say we had standards when we picked these people. It is only applied when they're talking about diversity. It has to stop. We should have standards for everyone, obviously, but it's one of those code words, the same of which is unconscious bias. There's nothing unconscious about it. I know you want to excuse yourself from your bad behavior, but if you were my children, I wouldn't smack you because that's wrong, but I would ground you. Unconscious bias is just an excuse for not trying hard enough to find diverse people. Now, this is not as big an issue in Canada, I'm guessing, because you're much nicer people. But it is an issue in Silicon Valley. A lot of people really do think they got to where they got, not because of the little relationships they make and things like that. You've got to be thinking about it all the time, because all it does is mirror each other. And you know what, companies, there's so many studies, I'm so sick of showing them, so I'm not going to. There's so many studies that show that a diverse company is a more successful company. We should not have to prove it. We should do it because it's just the right thing, but it is actually true. Next one, next slide. It's high time for disruption. Everybody likes to disrupt things in Silicon Valley. It's their favorite things. They like to talk about how they disrupt everything. Well, disruption is often a code word for destruction. Sometimes you don't want to disrupt things. It is not always the right thing to do. Right now, jobs are being disrupted. That's the word they use. You know what? They're being eliminated, and we've got a big social problem once they do. When AI and all the other things that are coming down the pike really get going, you're going to see an enormous decline in jobs, and that's going to be an enormous social issue, and then we're going to have all kinds of political problems and everything else. So one of the things that I think they try to bandy about too much in Silicon Valley is the idea of disruption being a good thing. You have to think about the impact of what you're doing, not to end bad things, but to create new things out of them. The celebration of disruption, to me, is a little bit man-boy. Like, I think I'll break these blocks without thinking of what you're building and the kind of society you're building on top of it. So I'd like to sort of get rid of the idea that all disruption is good, because it's simply not. Last one, and then I will answer questions from the lovely Alistair. This is my motto in life: comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's really hard when you're in a place like Silicon Valley where there's enormous success to think that this is the way the world is. The world is not like this for the most part. They're building apps that make them more comfortable. There's so many food services in San Francisco. I always call it, it's like assisted living for millennials. A lot of these problems are not problems that need to be solved. We do not need to have our washing done immediately. We do not need to have our liquor delivered immediately. We do not need to have an app that does all kinds of things for us. It's a nice thing to do, but at the same time, Silicon Valley should be pushing on harder and more important issues: poverty, healthcare. I do think driving cars are really interesting because it does affect the planet. But one of the things that's important is not to only be celebrating these victories and this wealth and this creation of power, but at the same time be understanding what most people in the world are living like, which most people don't think about when they're making all these apps. And I'm going to end by reading you should read this whole article by Alison Arief. It was in the New York Times this weekend, and Silicon Valley went nuts because she questioned them for 1.2 seconds about how great they are for the planet. And she wrote, "We are overloaded daily with new discoveries, patents, and inventions, all promising a better life. But that better life has not been forthcoming for most. In fact, the bulk of the above list targets a very specific and tiny slice of the population. As one colleague in tech explained it to me recently, for most people working on such projects, the goal is to basically provide for themselves everything that their mothers no longer do. In this way, innovation is very much mirroring the larger public discourse. A distrust of institutions combined with unabashed confidence in one's judgment shifts solutions away from fixing, repairing, and improving and shoves them towards the destruction for its own sake. Sound like a certain presidential candidate or Brexit? Yes, it does. So I am here to say I hate Trump too, but Trump is us. We are responsible for him, and we can't pretend we're different. So it's really important to be thinking hard of why something like that happens, why it's happening in the United States. You all have a wonderful, wonderful head of government, so I'm not going to blame you. But it's really important that we don't separate ourselves from what's happening because it is us. It is not someone else. And now, Alistair.
There are a few things more intimidating than interviewing you, so thank you. That was great, and I think most tweetable quotes per minute.
No, thank you.
That was good. Well done.
I have a lot of them.
I got a big question for you.
Yes.
We had a talk yesterday from John Konevsky about the future of medicine.
Yeah.
And he started out with kind of a mind fuck where he said, look, there's this technology that improves patient outcomes by 30%, and he went on about it. It sounds amazing. He goes, it's called checklists.
Right.
And no one uses them. Mm-hmm. So why do you care about stem cells in your Facebook feed? Mm-hmm. It seems to me like we see all these amazing things that are for the 1% that are going to solve a very niche problem. We can't get out of our own way, and we're polarizing political systems. So these unintended consequences of like Facebook feeds and so on.
Right.
How do we get people to think about the low-hanging fruit like checklists that are cultural change and so on when we're celebrating the tech that people click on Facebook?
You know, it's really interesting. I think it's because the people who create it and the world they live in. I mean, you do have a very vibrant tech scene here in Montreal and throughout Canada and throughout the world, but really the center of it is Silicon Valley. And these people live in a mutually self-reinforcing world, a bubble, where you know, an Uber comes in an instant. They work well. They'll get food anytime. They don't think, like San Francisco has become a horrible place to live in a lot of ways for many, many people. We have homelessness problems that are severe. We've got drug problems. We've got rich versus poor, like nowhere else, the divide. And the fact that this is happening in the place with the creation of the most wealth in history is shocking. Or maybe it's not shocking, maybe it's exactly the way it should happen. But it's really interesting that they don't tend to want to focus on solving problems for the many when they can solve problems for the few. You know, I don't think they're problems, they're conveniences. It's great to have things delivered, it's great to have things easier. I avail myself to them all the time. But I think they don't think on a larger scale. And what I'm really hoping, I have said this a lot, it was from someone, an investor, that Silicon Valley spends a lot of time, big minds chasing small ideas. And I'd like the big minds to chase the big ideas, which I mentioned.
So I think, I'm going to ask the inverse of that question. Is the bubble necessary to produce a rate of moonshots that we want in the economy? And usually, we talked earlier about the innovations, Tim was talking about innovations coming from war, innovations coming from moments of crisis or a desperation. Have we found a non-militarized way to sort of make new inventions at high speed and it just turns out to be full of jerks?
Well, I think there are some amazing innovations going on right now. I mean, the stuff around the cars, there's no question, save for a Tesla accident, and I'm sorry that it was a tragedy that man died, but what's going on in cars is really going to change things. It's a really significant if we can get our world around it, it will change the way people live across the world, just the way state highways or the telephone. It's a really important innovation. I think a lot of the stuff around healthcare is still sort of in its earliest stages, and finance too, the way people spend and buy and stuff like that. I think that's really interesting.
So if we're going to step back to a really macro question, and then we'll get into some more details, we're still obsessed with GDP. I mean, one of the things we think about a lot is the balance of trade in countries. We want to see productivity per worker, so we're trying to automate a lot of stuff. Can we solve these problems of like capitalism as the motive force for innovation without looking at the financial indicators like GDP on which we really depend?
You know, it's interesting. One of the biggest proponents, every time someone just even questions the fact that poor people are having a bad time in this country, Mark Andreessen always pops up with an idiotic quote about how it works so well every day. Like, of course it does. Like, thank you for it's not mutual. I'm always like, you're such an idiot. It's not mutually exclusive. You can like capitalism and still criticize it. But he does it all the time. He's literally like, click. It's fascinating and horrifying at the same time. But you know, I think one of the things that's coming, unfortunately, with the Trump presidency, and also the left and the right in the U.S., for example, is really obsessed with this trade issue and shutting down free trade and shutting down globalism. Either side is doing it. It's not one side or the other. And so I worry that we're going to get more into that issue going forward, where we're going to sort of separate ourselves by country much more significantly in the next era, whatever it happens. Maybe it's the era before everything gets great and we all turn into Star Trek, but I don't think so.
Okay, back to the tactical. Let's talk about journalism.
Yeah.
How do you speak truth to power while still maintaining the access you need to do good stories in a post-Gawker, Peter Thiel era?
Post-Gawker. Well, you know, I'm not Nick Denton, so I don't publish sex tapes. That's a plus. So I don't know why he did that. I don't know, whatever. It's not my business. I think that I'm certain someday someone's going to come and get me. I'm surprised I'm not dead now. But, you know, who knows?
Mark Andreessen just tweeted something.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't do it. He's a wimp. You know, someone else might. I mean, I do worry about people like Peter Thiel. What he did to Gawker, whatever you think of Gawker, is appalling. He did it in secret. He did it, he funded it until they won. Now, if they had not won, do you think you'd have heard a word from him? No, you wouldn't have known he had done it. He did a kind of a crazy victory lap after he killed off a media company and said it was philanthropic. No, it was revenge for outing him. Like, okay, he's really pissed that he's gay, and so he has to take down a company. When I, you know, was outed at one point, I just hit a wall. I don't think you need to take down a media company because you have self-hating homosexuality, whatever. But I think what's really important is that you keep doing that. I don't quite know why they continue not to allow me, but I think at some point I will pay a price for it. I'm guessing. We'll see. I'm kind of old, so it's kind of too late to kill me. So. Never too late. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, fuck them. I don't care if they kill me.
So let's talk about eminent domain. So in real estate, the government can say, we're going to repossess this land because we need it, and run it as a public utility or whatever. I see certain, you mentioned Twitter, like the rise and fall of Twitter, but it's sort of like an RSS feed for humans. Like, we kind of need it. Like,
it'll get bought. It'll get bought.
At some point, but will it get bought? Or at some point, do you think some of these technologies will become like eminent domain? Like, if internet access is a civil right? How's that going to work out?
What are you, a communist? No. No.
Canadian.
Oh, right, forgot.
Just slightly right of Bernie.
Why is it that we're so close to each other and we're such assholes and you're so nice? I'd love someone to study that. It's literally like just a border, right? There's no wall. It's bizarre.
It's just a suggestion at this
point.
You
should build a wall. That's what you should do if Trump gets in. I'm telling you, you people should put up a wall immediately.
So do you think there is going to be a point at which a technology company is unable to sustain itself but provides such a public good that we need a mechanism to keep it going?
Who would own it? The post office? I mean, who would own it? Like, I don't know who'd own it. No, I think a big company. It's a very valuable piece of technology, and it can be iterated. I just think Twitter hasn't executed. I think Twitter's a perfect example of a company that hasn't executed. They were first to streaming video, absolutely, if you were, you know, with Vine, and now we wrote a piece last week about most of the executives leaving. So it's not that they weren't there with a lot of these ideas, it's just either the execution, or they're too small, or they can't, there's all kinds of reasons companies fuck up, but I think that it's, I think they'll get bought unless they somehow find some golden, whatever, silver bullet, whatever.
So you've been on Silicon Valley.
What? Yes,
and,
the TV show.
Dick Costello helped to write
I'm actually a
some of it.
consulting producer, which means I make no money. I get to go to the parties.
As is Costello. Is Silicon Valley good or bad for Silicon Valley?
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's, they love it because they're like, even though they mock them mercilessly, how like they never got attention as kids, like in high school, now they're popular. So they're like, oh, they're making fun of me. Isn't that great? But they do mock them relentlessly, and they still are like, love it. It's kind of weird. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome. But I think it's really quite good. I think it's a great show. Mike Judge is one of my favorite, the guy who created Alex Berg and others. And I think it really does reflect a lot. Sometimes it's not even funny. It's like true. Like we give them examples, and then they just put it, and everyone's like, ha ha ha. And I'm like, no, that happened. But like the woman who plays the VC, Lori. That's Marissa Mayer, just so you know. Just like that's clearly the way she talks and walks away and looks down. And, a lot of the characters, the guy who's the rich guy who bought and sold the company, that's...
3 commas.
That's like Mark Cuban and morphed with Sean Parker and a little Mark Benioff, which is like unholy on every aspect of it. And so they do a really, really good job.
So I'm going to ask a couple of practical questions,
Sure.
and I know it's time to break for lunch.
Okay.
There's a lot of startups here. What's the best and worst thing you can do to get the attention of a tech journalist?
Have a great product. That's pretty much it. Have a great product. I think people hire a lot of really fancy PR firms and try to put spins on things and a lot of bullshit. I think if you have a really great product that people use and is delightful or useful, I don't think you can miss, unless, there's reasons you could miss, but people forget having a great product is really the point. All these other machinations are pointless. I mean, again, Yahoo's a perfect example of this. They just don't have great products. That's all. It's not that complicated. However many stupid CEOs have fucked things up, the fact of the matter is, product is at the heart of it, is really an innovation of product, and keep making things consumers want, whatever you happen to be doing. And I think that's the only thing. I think the thing you could not do is get so caught up in the scene. The scene is very attractive and it's seductive, but it's really largely pointless. I think the great entrepreneurs have largely ignored the scene in a lot of ways. Some are sceney, but a lot of them really just make great products.
So in a lot of these technology industries, there's this trough of disillusionment. We start out
those things, yeah.
We start out with like chatbots, and last week they were awesome, and now everyone's like chat backlash. I don't want to type, and VR, we're about to go to this VR winter or whatever.
But that's a chattering class of idiotic journalists and tech insiders. Who cares? Like, I think it matters what consumers think. Like, what do consumers really like it? I think the problem is everybody has got like a hair trigger twitchiness. Like right now, Pokemon Go, which I call Pokemon Get the Fuck Away From Me, which I think is funny. My son is doing it now, Louis, and he's like, all the girls think we're losers, Mom. He's 14, but I'm doing it anyway. And he loves it, loves it, loves it. I know next week or 2 weeks or whatever, he'll be off of it. There's very few things that have staying power, and I think consumers are now in that twitchy. It's just the same thing as the news cycle, like with Donald Trump. Literally, he has insulted 29 different particular groups. Do we remember? Does he pay for it? No. Maybe it's collectively, maybe from God. Maybe God, he'll get up there and he'd say, you fucking asshole, I'm going to send you right down. But the fact of the he's just, oh, this person's laughing. But no, he's not going to pay for it. He literally insulted, I don't know, a nice guy from the New York Times who was disabled. It just goes on and on. The cycle happens so quickly. Do we forget the last thing that was said? And it's a little bit disturbing that nobody has any consequences for anything they do. And I think it's the same thing with companies. There's just it's just moving so quickly. You sort of appreciate a Facebook or a Google, which continues to do stuff that's really interesting. Same thing with Snapchat, actually. I thought that was going to be a fad, but it actually is really he can be quite a challenging person, but he's got some really interesting ideas. So something like that, it has to have staying power.
So you're aware of Eric Ries's new initiative, the alternate stock exchange for tech?
No, I am not, but go ahead.
So Eric's premise is let's create a new stock exchange, which changes 2 or 3 rules. And one of them is you get more voting shares the longer you're invested in the company.
Okay.
And another is executives, when dismissed, continue to vest out shares. So it's three things that after a lot of study.
Executive does what?
If you leave, you still vest the shares you were granted.
Okay.
So you're not incented to sort of think in a quarterly way.
Yeah.
And they spend a lot of time studying this, and Kleiner Perkins and others are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Like, if we create a genuinely new model of stock market where the financial incentives to think quarter to quarter are somehow reduced and they're held to a higher standard of transparency and so on, do you think that'll address some of the short-term stuff you just referenced?
No, I don't think. I think people, I have a different viewpoint of humanity than you do, I think. I think this is reflective exactly who we are. You know, there's an expression, you're born naked, innocent, and greedy, and we remain greedy. You know, like, essentially. I'm sorry to say that, and I think this is reflective. There is our better selves, but as long as we continue to, you know, have war on people of color in the United States, I mean, look at slavery ended 150 years ago, and it's still going on in a sicker version, not sicker, of course, than slavery, but it's going on in a sick version of doing this, and people actually argue about it. You know, it's like arguing that slavery is good. These shootings are depressing and disturbing, but they keep happening. The same thing with shooting the police. The whole thing it really is a very difficult time, and I do think is reflective of our base halves, and then there's our better halves that go to the moon or have children or help people. And so you have to sort of figure out how we get to access that part of our brain better. And I would like to have a stock market like this, but my faith in financiers is rather low. And so I don't see that they, you know, there's an expression, you're so poor, all you have is money. And I think that's what they're like. And I don't think they're going to do that. I think it would be nice, but they're not going to do that.
I was going to ask you if you think success happens mostly in hindsight, but your remarks seem to suggest that that's...
In hindsight, yes. Yeah.
So let me finish with this question. What do you think the people in this room need to do to remember? What's the best way for them to remember, if and when many of them are successful, that they didn't get there by themselves? If and when they're successful, what's the best way for them to keep in their minds that they didn't get there themselves?
You know, it is really hard to do that. Like, everybody, once you become successful in Silicon Valley, everybody is licking you up and down all day. And so you start to believe it. You know what I mean? Like I get the same behavior. Oh, Carrie's so smart. I'm like, fuck you. Like, not so. You know, I mean, I'm very hard on myself, and I'm hard on other people, obviously, clearly. But one of the things that's important is there's very few people who have a very sense of self and keep it sort of, I hate to say keep it real, but they keep it on a base level. I tell this story because it happens all the time, but there was this guy who's very well known. If I said his name, you know exactly who he is. And I was talking to him about something, and in the middle of talking, he started doing the downward facing dog in yoga, right? So I'm looking at his ass wearing a Juicy Couture outfit, and I said, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm doing yoga. And I said, yeah, but we were having a conversation. And he goes, well, I felt like doing yoga. And I was like, listen, man boy, or man baby, really, you can't do that. Like, I'm having a conversation. We could finish our conversation, and then you could do any stupid yoga move you want. I don't give a flying fuck. But you need to stop now and finish the conversation, and then you can move on. He's like, no one else minds. And I go, exactly, no one else minds. It was just like, it was such a moment. And this person had been a pretty decent person at the beginning of their career, hence billionaire, hence just really had no clue that people treat him differently. And it was fascinating. And I was like, and of course I knew him when he was here. So I talked to him like he's here. And he was shocked that I spoke back to him. And it was just one of those moments. So if you do yoga when you're talking to someone, you're a jackass, okay? And I think you can keep that. Oh, there's Dave. It was Dave McClure who did it. Now, Dave McClure is not a billionaire as far as I know, correct? But it happens all the time.
He's 500 strong.
I try to do all kinds of things like that to bug people. I just had lunch with Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not trying to drop a name, but sometimes I hug him to make him uncomfortable. And I don't like, I don't like hugging myself particularly, except my kids. And I always do it because I know he's like, ah! Like, and I don't know why I do it. I'm such a cruel asshole, but I just do it, and I know it's because no one, sometimes I ask him for a sip of his soda, or no, he doesn't drink soda, he drinks like protein shakes or whatever, and sometimes I'm like, can I have a sip? And he's like, oh, like no one ever does this. So, anyway.
All right. Anybody get enough tweets there?
Okay. Mark
right.
is fantastic. By the way, Mark Zuckerberg is literally one of the most interesting executives. He's really evolved from a very sort of selfish man-boy kind of thing to he's really interesting.
I've been fascinated by how Facebook started with like the jerkiest thing in the world. Like look at pictures of your roommates. And now it's actually like they're doing really interesting stuff.
He's really improved himself. When I first met him, he walked in the room, it was so long ago, and he said, I heard you think I'm an asshole. Because his COO at the time said, oh, I don't want to meet him, I heard he's an asshole. I think I said that. And so he walked in and literally said, I heard you think I'm an asshole. And I said, well, I don't know you well enough to know if you're an asshole, but maybe you are. And it went from there, but he really has evolved. He to me is a very good example of someone who has kept it relatively, sometimes he misses it, but I really think he's a thoughtful person.
All right. Any last thoughts?
No, that's it.
Right.
Thank you so much. You did an excellent job.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you.